Welcome. We're taking a look tonight into a really, really disturbing case.
We are.
We're going deep into the story around Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest. This was Milwaukee, evening of July 21st, 1991, apartment 213.
Yeah, and the scene? It was intense. Multiple police units, firefighters, all descending on this one apartment in an old building.
You can just imagine the neighbors, right? Watching officers carry out boxes, then a whole refrigerator.
And of course that infamous blue barrel. What could possibly be inside?
The answer came fast, less than 24 hours in the media.
Yeah.
And it was just horrifying.
The remains of 17 young men.
Yeah. This apartment was the lair of, well, one of history's most terrifying serial killers, the Milwaukee monster, Jeffrey Dahmer.
You know, when you first hear about something like this, your mind kind of jumps to, well, to the usual explanation.
I think a really troubled childhood, abusive parents, addiction, that sort of thing.
Exactly. That's the pattern we often see, or at least expect, with such monstrous behavior.
But with Dahmer, the early years, they actually seem surprisingly normal based on the reports we have.
Right. Like, people described him as a happy, lively little boy with his parents, at least, until he was about 4.
There were some signs later. His mother's depression, maybe some family arguments.
Yeah, indications, but it doesn't quite paint that typical picture we often associate with the origins of such extreme violence.
The change, it seems, might have started around the time his younger brother was born.
That's when the tension between his parents really seemed to ramp up, eventually led to divorce.
And there was also a pretty significant surgery he had during childhood. Reports suggest that Swankin played a part too, contributing to him sort of retreating inward into a darker place.
It makes you think of that Nietzsche quote, doesn't it? The one Stephen King uses in Misery.
Oh, yeah. If you gaze long enough into an abyss,
the abyss will gaze back into you. It feels eerily relevant to Dahmer.
Like dwelling in those dark mental spaces.
Yeah.
It can really isolate you.
Absolutely. Researchers talk about how it can lead to this profound social isolation, feeling estranged even from, yourself.
And that really seems to describe what happened to Dahmer.
Definitely. He was known to be very withdrawn, shy in school, had a hard time making friends.
And this kind of isolation, it's not just awkwardness. It has deep roots, doesn't it? Like evolutionary roots.
Oh, absolutely. Think back to early humans. Being part of a group was, well, it was survival. Shared resources, protection.
So being excluded wasn't just hurtful, it was dangerous.
Exactly. It triggers this deep-seated anxiety, this psychological distress. So Dahmer struggled to connect, combined with feeling maybe unsupported by his parents.
It wasn't just a result of a disturbed mind, it probably fed into it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It likely fueled his troubled psyche and ultimately the really destructive behaviors later on.
When people feel that isolated, that out of control, they often look for ways to get some control back, right?
Yeah, they seek mechanisms. And for Dahmer, starting in adolescence, those mechanisms were alcohol.
He drank heavily.
Very heavily. And violent fantasies. He actually said alcohol was a primary factor in his crimes.
And the fantasies, they got so intense.
Apparently so violent that he felt, or claimed he felt, he had to act them out just to get some kind of control over them, which is terrifying.
There's another really critical piece here, too, isn't there? His struggle with his sexual identity.
Yes, from a young age. Just like he couldn't talk about his fascination with killing animals and keeping their bones.
Which is disturbing in itself.
Deeply. But he also couldn't confide in anyone, especially his parents, it seems, about his sexual feelings, his desires for other men.
So nowhere to turn with that either. More isolation.
Exactly. It likely just added to that feeling of being an outsider and maybe pushed him towards finding control in his own deeply warped way.
And when you look closely at the crimes, at the interviews he gave later, control is just everywhere.
It's the central theme, isn't it? Control over situations, control over people, control over his own urges.
Which ultimately led to murdering the people he wanted to control.
Yes, it's chilling. There was even that period, several years, where he actually stopped killing.
Right, like he was trying to regain control.
It seems plausible, an attempt maybe to manage those impulses, but ultimately he failed.
So we have these elements, the childhood stuff, the urges, his mother's depression.
Yeah.
But there's also his father, Lionel Dahmer.
Yes. The man who sat next to Jeffrey in that final interview before his death, a chemist, wrote that book, A Father's Story.
And his first thought, learning about the cannibalism?
Was apparently, how much am I to blame for this? That question just haunted him.
For the rest of his life, reportedly.
Yeah.
So that interview, Stone Phillips conducted it, right? Well-known ABC guy.
Yep. And Lionel was right there, his book having just come out.
Now, you'd expect someone who did these monstrous things to look monstrous, maybe, or act erratically.
But Dahmer, despite everything keeping body parts as souvenirs, unimaginable stuff, he appeared quite neat, calm even.
Started with small talk.
About the weather.
Yeah, talking about the snow, which is, not exactly what you'd picture. It doesn't really fit the profile of extreme antisocial behavior, does it?
Not at all. It's jarring. And he seemed thoughtful. Paused between sentences, like he was considering his words carefully.
Made eye contact when talking about personal opinions.
He did. Again, kind of unusual for someone you'd suspect of severe mental disorder and, well, cannibalism.
Phillips seems to have handled it well, though. Starting light, easing into the heavier stuff, the book.
Yeah, building some rapport, getting Dahmer to open up more, skillful interviewing.
Looking at Dahmer's body language in that interview, the stillness, the hands barely moving, that slight neck tilt.
Right. If you didn't know who he was, you might read it a couple of ways. Maybe deep psychological distress hiding underneath.
Or just intense effort to stay controlled, to keep it all in.
Exactly. An extreme effort at self-regulation.
Yeah, the breathing. You mentioned something about their breathing patterns, Jeffrey and Lionel's.
Yeah, there's often a similarity you'd expect, genetics, time spent together. But in that moment, their breathing, posture, even blink weights were different.
Unlike the usual mirroring you see.
Right, that unconscious mirroring that happens when people are connected. Here, Jeffrey seemed relatively calm on the surface, but Lionel, he looked more anxious.
Maybe worried about what Jeffrey might say, or how he himself would be perceived.
Could be. And Jeffrey leaning away from him slightly on the armrest.
Suggests detachment. Especially since it was their first meeting after the book came out.
Possibly. Maybe something in the book bothered Jeffrey. Lionel mentioned a childhood sexual assault Jeffrey supposedly experienced. There was definite discomfort there.
So when we look at these things, shifting, blinking, eye contact, we're trying to glimpse their internal state, right? What's going on inside?
Pretty much. We're looking for clues to their thoughts, their mental imagery.
You also mentioned a gesture by Phillips, the interviewer.
Yeah, a really notable moment. His hand makes this gesture, unconsciously it seems, that looks a lot like strangulation.
Wow. Maybe reflecting his own subconscious take on Dahmer.
It's possible. A chilling little detail.
And Lionel. Just imagining his internal struggle, that constant question, was it me? Did I contribute to this monster?
That kind of thought, dwelling on it constantly, it could easily lead to nightmares, a constant fear of blame.
When Jeffrey started describing how the fantasies became real, Lionel was watching him intently.
Very intently. Nodding sometimes, maybe looking for answers himself. Or maybe feeling some relief if the conversation seemed to move away from his own potential fault.
It's strange, their demeanors almost seemed to flip at that point.
Yeah, Jeffrey seemed a bit more anxious then, while Lionel appeared maybe a bit more composed.
Experts often say Dahmer was different from other infamous killers like Bundy or Ramirez or Manson.
He was. Psychologists, body language experts, they point out the differences. Bundy had that manipulative charm, Manson, his chaotic energy.
With Dahmer, you don't see that expected explosion or any kind of satisfaction when he talks about the crimes.
It never really materializes, does it? It's this unsettling lack of affect almost.
The one really telling line, perhaps, is when he says, he had taken control of me.
Right, as if shifting responsibility, blaming the compulsions, the desires, an external force almost. It reminds you a bit of Stephen King's concept in It, that kind of consuming entity.
So beyond the horrific acts themselves, the classic signs of psychopathy seem less obvious.
Less obvious in his presentation, perhaps. But the background reports, the testimonies, they consistently point to those deep childhood deprivations.
That lack of belonging, with peers, even with his own family, because of the parents' neglect and issues.
And that likely crippled his ability to cope with other traumas, like that surgery. There was no real support system to help him process it.
And all that together, the isolation, the trauma, the lack of connection, fuels that adolescent need for authority, control.
A need for control within society, yeah. Which then twisted into those horrific acts.
Going back to Lionel in that interview, his reaction, it almost felt like...
Like part of the book tour?
A little, yeah. And when Jeffrey is talking about his internal struggles, maybe towards understanding, Lionel jumps in with, who helped you along the way?
That question, it does seem a bit self-serving, doesn't it? Asking about help, about credit, while your son is facing, the consequences of mass murder.
It struck some analysts as potentially narcissistic.
It's certainly an unusual moment. And look, there are various psychological takes on Dahmer. Borderline personality disorder gets mentioned.
Characterized by fear of abandonment, identity issues.
Right. Fluctuating emotions. Others see parallels, strangely enough, with the thought patterns of dictators who commit mass killings.
A kind of four-stage progression.
Yeah, like a period of depression, then these achievements in their internal world, their schemes, then their whole mental framework shifts, leading to destruction.
It's just hard to comprehend.
It truly is.
Jeffrey Dahmer's end came in prison, November 28, 1994.
He was cleaning a bathroom with 2 other inmates. Apparently, on a day with less direct supervision, one of them attacked him.
With a metal bar from the gym.
Yeah. Killed him right there.
And his father, Lionel, he lived much longer.
He did. He passed away just recently, actually. December 5th, 2023. Aged 87. Heart attack.
So the Dahmer story,
Mm-hmm.
it's just this chilling dive into human psychology, isn't it? Into isolation, that desperate need for control.
Absolutely. And even after exploring the arrest, the background, so many questions linger. How exactly does someone get to that point?
Is it nature versus nurture, childhood experiences versus something inherent? What about society's role in that isolation?
And just the nature of evil itself, it's elusive. What does this case really tell you, the listener, about the human capacity for darkness?
How do you square that seemingly ordinary surface with the absolute horror underneath?
It's a case that just continues to challenge our understanding long after the headlines fade. Really makes you think.